Well, thanks for joining me, Luke. I've been on y'all's podcast a few times, and we're doing something a little different here with doing a little commentary on the episodes that we just released with Dr. Hoffmeier.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks for having me back on again, Adam, and excited to talk about this and react to your latest podcast.
Yeah, good deal. So yeah, we made some notes on some different bits. So if you haven't listened to the previous episode with Dr. James Hoffmeier, you might want to go back and do that. But we'll try not to leave you in the dust. We'll start here with a clip about 17 minutes and 50 seconds in, and then we'll
Okay.
pause and talk about it a bit.
Right.
All the laws that we have in terms of federal laws and not only the laws but all the um,
City
state
ordinances
law,
and
ordinances and state and county and if I don't shovel my sidewalk by within 12 hours or 24 hours of the snow, I could be fined. We have so many. I mean, we have must have millions of laws when you put them all together, and yet the Old Testament really has a very when you think about it, it's not all that tedious.
Okay.
thoughts,
First,
Luke? Yeah.
yeah. First, I want to just give my position so that everyone who is listening knows where I'm coming from. I do not believe that the Bible teaches the modern system of vetting, the way that we understand vetting as far as immigrants are concerned. I do not believe the Bible teaches that at all. I believe that there's a lot of gymnastics and a lot of appealing to descriptive passages. The best arguments are appealed to descriptive passages, and the best arguments are appeals to the Hebrew definitions of ger uh, and was it
Zer.
not zer and nakri and as a toshav and all that kind of stuff. Those are the best arguments. My appeal ultimately is to the law of God, which does not give the state the responsibility, permission, and authority to regulate the thoroughfare of its borders. Now, a lot of people will hear that and say, well, that's just a given. Um, but I do believe that the consistent application of biblical justice is what regulates the nation's borders better than any sort of watchtower and wall and vetting process and immigration laws and things like that. I do believe that God's law is what regulates the people naturally, and to such a degree that it doesn't really matter what nation you come from. If you come here and you try to if you try human trafficking, you will be killed. If you try to rape, you will be killed. If you try adultery, you will be killed. If you try to blaspheme, you will be killed. But if you come to I'm sorry, here, but I'm saying here is assuming a biblical society. Um, if you try to come to a biblical society with God's law in place, you will naturally be punished for breaking God's law, and you will not be punished for breaking man's law, since there is no mechanism in place to institute man's law. You'll just have, if you'll break man's customs, you'll break man's traditions, but that doesn't necessarily necessitate a punishment. And I believe that God's system, the way that it is what regulates the country's borders and regulates immigrants. I'm not against borders. I don't think that borders are wrong. I don't think that making a wall is wrong. I don't believe in defending. I don't believe that defending your borders is wrong. I do believe that the state's responsibility is not to has nothing to do with checking every single person who comes in here, asking them questions, getting a promise out of them that they're going to definitely break, and it should be defining who's allowed to live in the nation and who isn't. God doesn't give them that authority. That is completely irrelevant. The first 100 years of America, we had a much more biblical immigration system where you didn't have to go report yourself to the magistrate and say, "Hey, I'm here. What are your questions? Let me justify the reason why I'm here." We weren't deporting people the way that we understand it right now. And I've heard somewhere that a lot of the immigrants back then deported themselves, since 'cause we were a much more Christian nation. They realized that they couldn't have a successful life here. And I can't substantiate this claim, but I saw this. I think it was like a meme or something. Someone had made the claim that a lot of the immigrants deported themselves the more Christian we were, because they came here and they said, you know what, I'm not going to have a good life in my wickedness. I can't be a good practicing Catholic. I can't be a good practicing Muslim. I can't be a good practicing Hindu because everything's so Christian around here. It doesn't reward me for doing what I'm trying to do. So the more Christian our society is, the more the bad people will deport themselves. But I also believe that deportation is not a biblical punishment. If you do something that's a capital offense, you will be punished as a capital offense. And I do not think there's anything in the Bible that allows the state to pick somebody up and place them on the other side of a border. So that first, just that, so that people understand where I'm coming from. I believe in borders. I mean, it's fine to have a border. It's fine to have a wall if you want. It's fine to protect your borders. But it's not the state's responsibility to be checking every single person who comes in here and asking them questions that they're surely going to lie on. Um, and that
So,
first one,
well, if I
sorry.
could ask a question, so when you say protect but not ask questions, how do you put those two together?
Well, it's kind of like the same with security. The way that we understand private security. Um, Private security, if you walk into the mall, they don't ask you questions, right? Um, they don't come and say, "Who are you and what are you doing here?" It's just naturally assumed that you're there to shop. The only time that they act is when you start acting up, right? And I believe that is the biblical magisterial response. Like, we're not here to ask you what you're here for and why, or and make you justify yourself. But if you start acting up, you're going to get the sword real fast. And I think that is the byproduct of God's justice is protection. The byproduct of God's justice is freedom. The byproduct of God's justice is peace. But if we try to predict and get out ahead of these bad people and try and stop it before it happens based on the person's alleged character, that's not going to work. When I go into Walmart, nothing happens to me until they start suspecting me of something, and then they come ask questions. But again, that's their prerogative. It's their private property. It's not the state's responsibility to say, "Hey, are you a good person?" And don't lie to me. That's just that's it's completely asinine and ridiculous to believe that system is going to have any work. It's completely impractical. It's not going to work. It's never worked. And for most of our history, we operated very successfully without that system.
So, any comments on this first clip, or
Yes, the first clip that he said there was something I agree with him on. You know, I don't believe that you can institute our current understanding of border enforcement, immigration laws, without it becoming tedious. He said, the Old Testament law. I mean, he's talking very similarly to a theonomist. He's looking at the law and saying, "Hey, it's actually pretty simple when you look at it. There's not much." And he says we have a lot of laws today, but I think once you try to institute what a lot of people argue for as far as who's allowed in the country, you can't escape the bureaucracy. You can't escape the multitude of laws. You have to legislate into oblivion because people are always going to find a way to break man's law. They're always going to find a way to break it. And once they do that, then you have to make another one. And once they break that one, then you have to make another one because they're always going to try and get around your systems. They're going to find loopholes because man cannot legislate effectively. God is the only one who can legislate effectively. And so I agree with him there. And as a theonomist, I want to keep it that way. But I do not believe that if you try to do what he's arguing for here, that you can escape what the problem that he says is it becomes tedious. Because what happens, you set up and you say, okay, law, you have to go report yourself to the magistrate. Okay, people don't report themselves to the magistrate. They skip around. Okay, now you got to punish the people for not going to the magistrate, right? And then some people might go to the magistrate, but then they might lie. Okay, well, there's no law saying you can't lie to the magistrate. So now we have to make a law saying you can't lie to the magistrate. And then on and on it goes because people are just going to find ways around it as they are right now. And you're not going to stop the immigrants from coming in. I mean, right now they're coming in. They're coming in legally, illegally, whatever. They're coming in. You can't stop them. I don't know where we get this idea that we can regulate the immigrants. We can't regulate drugs. We can't regulate guns. And conservatives are right when they laugh at people saying, what makes you think you're going to stop guns from coming into this country or getting in the hands of bad people? Gun-free zones. That's how I view immigration. Like, oh, this is a gun-free zone. Like, are you
Eagle,
kidding
illegal
me?
immigrant free zone.
Yes, illegal immigrant-free zone. You think that's going to stop anything? Okay, new law, it's illegal. No, that's not going to happen. And we need to have a system in place that assumes that people are going to immigrate here past whatever sort of regulation immigration process you put in. It's the same with guns. No matter we as conservatives know, no matter what gun laws you pass, people are still going to have guns. So we need to be realistic rather than trying to pass a bunch of laws to stop the people from getting guns. We need to give the righteous people in this nation more freedom so that they can protect their private property, which is why the LA riots, incidentally, were so successful, is because people are not allowed to protect their own property. If you protect your own property, if you even show a gun, if you even show a gun, I saw one guy on the news. He just showed a gun. He didn't even do it. He didn't point at anybody. He just showed it. He said, if you come on my property, I'm going to defend it. And then the police went and arrested him. The Rodney King riots, when the Koreans defended their property, effectively, they did, the cops went and arrested them. It is illegal for you to protect your own private property. And so the more we try to restrict immigration, the more the righteous people lose power, and that power is given to wicked people for them to take advantage of our private property.
Yeah, I think it makes people's heads explode a little bit when you say, well, you can't, if you don't allow, making immigration illegal because it doesn't work and people are just going to go past it anyway. And it's the same argument for, like you said, gun-free zones. Well, then you've just ensured that the only people who are going to have guns here are going to be people who are not afraid to break this statute or this law.
Right. And if our definition is good people are the ones who follow the laws, they're punished because they have to get into some completely asinine bureaucratic system and wait 8 or 9 years to get in here. And those are the people we want to keep out? I mean,
the people who are willing to submit to all the regulations, they're the people we want, and they're the people that are getting, practically speaking, they're the ones who are getting delayed.
Yep. So man's law only complicates, and God's law is the one that simplifies everything, and it puts the righteous in a perpetual state of doing the right thing. Always, in God's law, the righteous always have authority to do the right thing. Right now, if I tried to defend my property from a riot, I will be arrested. I will be prosecuted, and the wicked have more power, and that's what man's law does.
Yeah, it's interesting to talk about. I think I asked him a little bit on this later. I don't think we have it in a clip here, but my question was, one of the things you mentioned earlier was, if I'm, I might remove myself from the country if I don't like the laws. Like, I think there's a reason that people aren't beating down the doors to go to Afghanistan.
Yes.
It's because they're like, I don't know the laws here. I'm going to run afoul of something really, really serious that's perfectly normal to me. And I'd just rather, there's nothing super attractive in Afghanistan for me anyway. I'm just not going to go there. I'm going to steer clear. And I think you have the same thing with the Irish, with Muslims, with Catholics, and they sort of created their own little self-cloisters and communities. And that's just a natural thing.
Yes. And that was, I mean, Rushdoony points this out. He said that was the original purpose of the ghetto. The ghetto was a place for you to come and live amongst your own people, so that you could transition. It was a transition zone from your old country to the new country, where you could make mistakes, you could learn the language, you could learn the customs and the traditions and the laws, so that you don't accidentally just go out into the middle of nowhere and suddenly you're taking this mindset from the Middle East or Africa or India or wherever you're from, and you go out amongst these other people and you're offending people, you're breaking laws you didn't know that you're not allowed to break. So the ghetto, the purpose of the original ghettos was to draw the immigrants in, say, here's the country, here it is, here you can learn it among your own people who are going to teach you, but this will prepare you and your children to live in America. And I believe God's law sets up a system like that will allow the immigrants to learn his ways and his rules and deprogram themselves from the paganism that they received when living in a pagan nation.
Sure. Yeah, let's move on to the next clip here.
Tweak the believer, the Christian, into saying, look, you're not even being faithful to your book. Look what it says, that somehow you'll feel guilty and you'll change your position. So my approach is a rather simple one, that in the Old Testament law, there are certainly minimally principles at work that are beneficial to a society.
And this is where, as a theonomist, I don't call myself a general equity theonomist. I'm what's called a non-legislative theonomist or Lancastrian theonomist because I don't think it's right for the magistrate to institute law based on principles, because anyone could find a principle. I mean, I've seen people justify the most bizarre and wicked laws because they took the principle of Romans 13 that he is a servant for your good. And whatever that means, he's allowed to do. As long as he can justify it and tie it back to, well, it's for your good. He's allowed to institute anything he wants. I've seen people say that, and they can say all the time, all over the place. Hey, look, I'm taking the principle, right? I take the principle, and then I institute my understanding of that principle, and now it's a law. And my fear, and I think this is proved with the history of this kind of thinking, is that God's law becomes a principle, and my principles become law. We're no longer doing God's law anymore. We're just God's law. He gives us some tips and tricks. God's got seven great ways to make your nation Christian again. All right, that's God's law is a clickbait internet article. And my principles, now you have to follow them, or I will punish you. And that's my fear when we say, well, God's got some great principles. It's true. God has great principles, but we don't institute our idea of what God's principles are. We institute God's law as is. And then we develop principles, but these principles do not become law. They might become customs. They might become traditions. They might become understandings. But these are not law. We don't take principles. And I always get a little scared when people say, well, there's a lot of great principles back there for us to use. And I'm like, Deuteronomy 4 and Deuteronomy 12, do not add to it, do not take away from it. That was there for a reason. And I do not think it is wise to view God's law as principles.
Yeah, I think it's helpful to define what we mean by law. It's something that was literally spelled out in God's word.
Yes.
Do this, don't do that. If this happens, then this needs to be done. As opposed to maybe a local city, basically any sort of shorthand decision that somebody might come to. In this situation, God's law doesn't spell out this exact example, a dispute over water rights or something like that.
Yes. Yes.
We have to reach a decision. And so I think there's a tendency for people to say, well, whatever decision you reach, let's go ahead and codify that as a shorthand way we can refer back to it and not have to go through this long, expensive deliberation process again.
Right. But again, under God's
yeah,
system,
I think like you said, we shouldn't call that law. We can call that maybe like a certain magistrate's precedent of a case, a record of something that was decided on, and it could be helpful to go back and read that reasoning. But to codify it and say that everybody must come down in the exact same way from now on, I think is dangerous.
Yes, it is. It's been disastrous. And I think God's law is something that everyone in the nation must follow. I mean, it's not an option. I think that's what makes God's law God's law. It's not optional. You can't just decide to kill. You can't just decide to murder. You can't just decide to commit adultery and steal and covet. As soon as you're born, you have to follow these laws. And I think that's what makes a part of what God's law is that it's universal and it's not optional. And so when we make a law that's universal and it's not optional, that is adding to God's law. And I don't think the magistrate is allowed to do that. You're not allowed to pass things that are not optional to follow, because then you're adding to God's law. God's law is universal and it's not optional. And as soon as you make a legislative body, you start passing things that are universal and they're not optional. And I believe that is when we start adding to God's law. Now, it's okay for the magistrates. I think that the leader of a nation will be a trendsetter. He'll be a custom and tradition producing machine based on his decisions. And then people are like, okay, this is a tradition. This is good. This is a custom. But you're not necessarily punished for breaking a custom. Law does carry a punishment either from God, but God's not going to judge you for breaking traditions. Or it's from the magistrate, who will punish you for breaking law, but again, they can't punish you for breaking traditions.
Dennis Prager has a quote from years ago where he says, the bigger the government, the smaller the individual. Mm-hmm. And just like you were saying, there's a passage, I think it's in 1 Kings, I think it's in 2 Samuel, where it says that David mourned when a certain person had died. And it said that David's mourning pleased the people just as everything that the king did pleased all the people. So it's like once you have this leader, this big government, it's basically everybody just agrees with you because they're small-minded.
Yes.
And that happened with David, and I think it happens today with Trump and with Vance and anybody else who's an authority figure.
Yes.
And it's not necessarily wrong. It's something I think to be aware of and to be ready to, mentally walk something back in your head just because we have a tendency to do that.
Mm-hmm. Amen.
All right, so here's the next clip.
It's a pretty big deal from two perspectives. Number one, the Israelites themselves had been sojourners. When Abraham and Isaac and Jacob live in the promised land before they officially and legally hold to it, they're in essence sojourners. They are gers.
The observation I want to make here is with the term ger, and a lot of people take this term ger and they juxtapose it with nakar, whereas the nakar is someone who's hostile, but the ger is someone that they assert has already agreed to follow the laws, someone who's been vetted, someone who said, I promise to be a good boy and I covenant or whatever. My question is, he said they were ger in Egypt, right? Does that mean that they worshiped Pharaoh? Because that's the argument. It's somebody who's agreed to follow the laws of and worship God and all that kind of stuff. That makes them a ger. Someone who doesn't agree to worship God is not a ger. And my thing is, okay, these guys were gers, right? That's your term. Does that mean that they worshipped, Ra and Sekhmet and Salbak and Sokar and Selkat, to quote Prince of Egypt there? But does that mean that they agreed to worship them? Well, no. Okay, so you're telling me you can still be a ger and not agree to worship. Well, yes. So I don't
Sojourner
think
doesn't mean necessarily actively participating in every maybe positive command.
Well, yeah. I mean,
That's what they would argue.
My contention is with the idea that a ger means is somebody who agreed to follow all the laws. I don't think Jacob agreed to follow all the laws of Egypt. I don't think he did. I think there was Pharaoh worship involved. I think there was, I mean, you can't tell me that they were like, oh yeah, everyone has a right to religion in Egypt. I don't think that he did, but he was still a ger. So my contention is with the definitions. I'm sure someone has a response to this, but that's my question is, how could he be a ger and still be an Israelite at the same time? Because they kept their culture, they kept their laws, they followed their own, they did their own stuff, and they were ger at the same time. Now, the response of the argument is, if you're a ger, you've left behind your culture, you've left behind your laws, you've left behind your religion. And my question is that what Jacob did as a ger? Is that what Moses did as a ger? No. So how can you be a ger and still maintain your culture, religion, your laws? How's that possible? That's just my question.
Yeah, I think you're right. Somebody who is a ger has not necessarily left all that stuff behind and has not necessarily fully adopted everything. It'd be like the difference between, somebody who's living in the land who's uncircumcised, and he might not necessarily be worshiping the Lord, but he's going to be careful not to worship one of his own gods,
right? Because
of the penalty for that.
Right, but again,
he can come in and he can trade. Yes. He can eat. Well, the Jews would have argued that you can't eat with him, and I think there wasn't a law that specifically forbade that. I think that was more just a precautionary tradition they added because of the uncleanness stuff. Yeah, they have no idea what this guy has been doing in private. Yeah. They have no idea where he's been.
Right. Yeah. It's just my contention with the way that people take the different understandings, and then they try in my opinion, they try to justify a modern vetting system based on the differences in the Hebrew categories. And they take the categories and they start making up new laws and systems based on the definitions of the Hebrew words. And I think that, in my opinion, that's a bad argument. And I go to Jacob and Moses, who were ger, but did not give up their culture, did not give up their religion. and didn't give up their God. But according to the arguments of the people who are like, let's pass laws based on our understanding of the categories, a ger is somebody who has agreed to follow the religion, someone who has agreed to someone who's been fully integrated. I'm saying I don't think Jacob and Moses were integrated. I just don't think they were.
No, they weren't. Yeah, and that can be one of the dangers, because like Hebrew can have very technical terms for things.
Yes.
But then it can also have very broad terms for things.
Yes.
All right, so next clip here.
Sociological and legal, in legal terms. It's just like we draw a distinction between somebody who is in the country with a student visa and a foreign student or a foreign person who's here with a green card.
So I think that's an understanding of that, in my opinion, with respect to Dr. Hoffmeier there. I think that's an anachronistic understanding. What were we doing? I mean, we didn't always have green cards in this nation. What were we doing before? I mean, how was our understanding of the foreigner, or like, were we at a disadvantage until we had the green card? We didn't know how to treat them until we had the green card. What were we doing before we had the green card? Was it disaster? Was it chaos? What was happening in this nation before the green card? And I think it's anachronistic to take our understanding of the green card and read it back into the text of Scripture and say, see, it's the same thing. And he might not be doing that. He might be, developing an idea and then just comparing it to the idea of the green card, and perhaps that's what he's doing. But I don't. I mean, from listening to what he said there, I don't think we should take these statist systems and then go back into the Bible and say, look, it's a one-for-one comparison. You could do that with a lot of things, the ultimate standard is what God has told the magistrate to do. God has never told the magistrate that you need to ask everyone questions and make sure they're allowed to live here before they live here. That's never a responsibility given to the magistrate. Their role is very passive. Their responsibility is justice. Justice shalt thou pursue, not regulation. And this is an argument for regulating the people who come into the nation. And I don't think we should take our modern understanding of green cards and IDs, papers, please, passports, identification numbers, and then reading it back onto the text and finding that stuff in there. Or rather, I think the argument should be, let's clear our minds of whatever statism we have in here and see what the Bible tells the magistrate to do.
Yeah, it seems to me like the whole immigration debate really shows that our justice system is wearing thin. Like a parent who tells the kids, all right, if you guys can't stop bickering over that toy, nobody gets the toy anymore.
Yes.
Or if you want to get a toy out, you need to come ask me for permission to get a toy. That's because there's been a problem with this certain toy or with this certain kid. So it's like, all right, because things are, every time you get this toy out, things go badly, I'm going to preemptively say, now you need to get permission. I think that's basically what's going on with the immigration thing, where the justice system used to be able to handle everything, and it was not backlogged years and years.
Yes. Yep.
And now, since it is backlogged years and years, we're trying to do all this preemptive stuff.
Yep.
To where you nip it in so far early in the bud, we're punishing things before it's anything that actually wrong has happened.
I think that's absolutely 100% correct. It's the difference of I bring this up often, but it's a father who prioritizes peace over justice. And after a while, there's no peace and there's no justice, versus a father in the house who prioritizes justice over peace. He receives both.
Yeah, my dad gave the analogy, this story he used to tell, where dead bodies would keep floating down a river and people would start pulling the dead bodies out, and it got to be so many, they organized a volunteer squad to go pull dead bodies out of the river. And I think in this case, the law says you're allowed to pull dead bodies out of the river. God's law says you can pull dead bodies out of the river. I think the practical thing to do is to go upriver and see, where are all these dead bodies come from? Can we build something to stop them from getting here in the first place? Mm-hmm. That's a very practical solution in the dead body analogy. In this analogy, with the immigration thing, it would be like punishing somebody who gets too close to a certain area of the country, and you go ahead and hit them there, when God's law doesn't necessarily say you can do that. If it's privately owned, and we'll get to that, that's a different matter. But that's not, excuse me, if it's whether or not it's private property is involved is not part of the discussion on immigration. If I'm on the Texas-Mexico border and my Mexican neighbor wants to come over to my house and have dinner, he can't.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But he's on my property and he's crossed nobody else's property. But now the
right.
United States says they get to get involved because you might cause a problem down the street, even if he never goes there.
That's a great analogy.
I always like asking those kinds of hairy questions. That's like, okay, if this is about private property, let's create a situation where there's no violation of private property involved.
Yeah.
And you can see where people actually stand.
Yeah, find a quick, it's actually not about private property.
Right. All right, so this next one is 28 minutes in.
And you'll notice that you read the narrative there in Exodus that the father of his future wife invites him to come in and have a meal. And the next thing we know, he's offering to marry his daughter to him. And he offers him a job caring for his sheep. So clearly, Moses is an invited guest. He's not an intruder, but he actually marries into the family. And when he has a child, his child is named Gershom.
I think it's, in my opinion, I think it's a stretch to say he was definitely an invited guest. Yes, in the high priest of Midian's house, but Midian as a nation, was he invited? We don't know. There's nothing in the text that says then Moses fled to Midian because they invited him to come there. It doesn't say that. He just went to Midian. That's all we know. And I don't see in any ancient nations a system of vetting that we're arguing for, except especially in the Bible, except one. I want to read this here. This is what I'm looking for when people appeal to the scriptures for their argumentation for and examples of the magistrate regulating immigration. I only see one. And this will be 1 Kings 15. This would be King Asa, okay? 1 Kings 15, verse 16. And there was war between Asa and Baasha, king of Israel, all their days. Baasha, king of Israel, went up against Judah and built Ramah, that he might permit no one to go out or come in to Asa, king of Judah. That is our modern system of immigration right there. There it is. That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the magistrate doing that, and the Bible saying you can do that, and a righteous king, righteous person doing that. I don't see anyone doing that. I see a wicked king doing that because they were going to Asa for justice because they knew they were going to get justice because Baasha was a complete pathetic excuse for a king. They weren't going to get justice for Baasha. But they were going to go to Asa for justice. And then Baasha saw what was happening. He built Ramah and said, okay, I'm going to stop all of the immigration and the thoroughfare between Israel and Judah. And I'm going to stop people from going to him. That's what I'm looking for. There is a case in point example of the magistrate getting involved with the immigration of nations. I don't see any righteous king doing that. I don't see the law telling kings to do that or any of the magistrates, nothing. The only time I see that is when a wicked king does it. So that's a strike against our understanding of, because that's it. That's our understanding right there of immigration. It's just setting up like these barriers and then stopping the thoroughfare of people. But the only person doing it that I see is a wicked king. And that's not exactly a good argument for our modern understanding of immigration. And so the idea that Moses was an invited guest, maybe he was, and maybe he wasn't. That's not a concrete. He was an invited guest for the high priest of Midian in his house, but there's nothing in the text saying he went to Midian because he was invited. And I don't think there was anyone I don't think anyone was at the border of Midian, which I suspect the borders changed all the time based on these were city states and these are warlike people.
Yeah.
Yeah, tribal lands. I bet you they changed all the time. And I don't think anyone can make a case that, oh yeah, he had to go and present himself at the border and say, here I am, I'm Moses, I'm here to sojourn, and I promise to follow all of Midian's rules and laws because I want to be a ger. Yet he was a ger, but he didn't give up his beliefs. He didn't give up his laws and his ways, as far as we know. But I do know there's nothing in the text saying that he was invited to Midian.
And I think it can be dangerous too to appeal to things that happened in Kings and say that this is either correct or incorrect. I feel like those stories are given there for us to, as Christians, to practice on and say, this person did this. Now, using the law,
Right.
what would you make of this decision? Was this king or this person right to do that, wrong to do that? Because
Yeah.
First Samuel, First Kings, there's relatively little commentary, and especially as you get further into the narrative
Very true.
of direct, commentary from God. This guy was right. This guy was wrong. There is some of that, but if you're not given that explicitly, it's like, okay, yeah, David committed adultery with Bathsheba. You get a commentary of what was wrong and what happened by the end of that story,
Yeah.
but not for several chapters after he did that. And
Yeah.
so I
But
think,
we do have a commentary on Asa being righteous and Baasha being wicked.
yeah, that's a interesting one too. All right, so next one is 30 minutes, 30 seconds in.
Oh, we have that the sojourner who again follows the laws, and you were talking about those earlier. They can share in observing Passover. They can participate in the offerings, Leviticus 22:17 through 19. They were to have the benefit of Sabbath day off. In the Ten Commandments, it mentions that the sojourner may get his rest too.
I'm just wondering in that categorization, is um, I think the example I have a contention with that example because let's say someone who's not a ger, well, he's a toshav or whatever, and he's just there to trade. He's just there to stay there for a little bit, but he doesn't want to become integrated into society, right? So that makes him not a ger according to the argument from the categories. He's not a ger, but he is there to do business. And he's just there sleeping in a hotel for a day or two, and then he's going to leave, right? Um, he still has to not work on Sunday. That was not an optional thing for the foreigners. If you came in here and you were working on a Sunday and you were a foreigner, even if you said I don't agree to all the laws, that was still a capital offense. No one's allowed to work on a Sunday. So even when God's law is instituted in a land, there's no one who's accepted from it. Now, there were certain things, I believe, of the ceremonial aspect of following the festivals and the feasts and things like that. They didn't necessarily have to do that, but
There were some things that they were specifically prohibited from taking part in.
yes, right,
You're not allowed to eat leaven on Passover either. Well, that might just have only been for the Jews. I don't think they would have gone out and tried to enforce that on somebody on a 2-day business trip that happened to be there during Passover.
right. I guess my contention is using the Sabbath day as an example. No one's allowed to work on the Sabbath. I don't care what nation you're from. I don't care what your status is, ger or not. You're not allowed to work on the Sabbath. So I guess that maybe I just have a small problem with that example. Like, well, he was to have the benefit. Well, everyone was to have the benefit. I mean, it doesn't matter who you are.
To have the benefit or die.
Yeah, that's just true. Yeah.
Yeah, benefit of the Sabbath rest is an interesting way to put it.
Mhm.
It would depend on who you are and what your intentions were.
And when you follow that narrative, you'll see that he is going to sojourn. We wouldn't think of going from one state to another as being sojourning. We're still citizens of the U.S. But in ancient Israel, if you lived in tribe X, you wanted to move to tribe Y, you had to get permission because, in theory, all the land was divided up between the tribes, the clans, the families, the extended families, and so in theory, no land was unowned. So if you're going to live in the farmer's field, you got to have his permission. And so that even happened on an internal basis within the country. So they were even more uh, uh, aware of this when people come from outside. And so the question is, uh, does this foreigner have the permission of the local authorities or the regional authorities or the king?
So my contention there is, I agree with the first half where he said, basically all of Israel was private property, all of it, from top to bottom, it was all private property. It was owned by somebody. Somebody owned it, especially with the laws of Jubilee reverting back to the original owners. You couldn't really escape the fact that almost all of Israel. This would cause a massive expansion, um, of families because the laws of Jubilee require the original plots to go back to doesn't and as far as I understand, it doesn't matter how much you subdivided it. If you had a plot that was 3 miles by 3 miles and you subdivided it into 100 homes, that whole thing went back and everyone basically lost their home. If I'm understanding Jubilee correctly.
Essentially buy it again for another 50-year period.
Yes, yes, and this would cause expansion, because people would realize, okay, I can't stay here forever, and so I agree with him there that basically all of Israel is private property, if we understand it correctly.
Everything except
Mike,
for anything within a walled city could be privately owned and permanently owned. It was never released in Jubilee. That would be the one exception.
oh yes, yes, and yes, there are exceptions, yeah, to that, and I think there's something with common lands as far as the area outside of a city, um, but. What I think was a little bit of a switcheroo there. He started by saying, well, you needed the private properties owner's permission. And then by the end, he said, well, you need the local authorities permission. I'm like, okay, so does the local authority own the land? Does the king own the land? I thought it was private property. You have to ask the farmer. And I agree with him there that if you want to sojourn in a different nation, that's between you and the owner of the land. No one else has a say. I agree 100%. Magistrate has absolutely nothing to say about that. If I want to sell my land to someone from Zimbabwe and he says, I'll pay you this much money, and I say, okay, we shake hands, magistrate's got nothing to say. He doesn't have to jump in there and say, hang on a sec, let me check to make sure that this guy's a good person, that he's going to follow all the laws. Completely irrelevant to the purpose of the magistrate. Completely irrelevant. Not what you're here for. Thanks. I'll vet him. That's between me and him. I'll vet him. You stay back. I don't trust you. I don't want you defining who's a good person. I don't want you defining who's a Christian. That's a horrible idea. I've heard people say that. Like, you can only come in if you're a Christian. This is the Christian nationalist talking point. We should have an immigration system where only the Christians come in, which is a terrible idea because now the state's defining who's a Christian and who's not. Historically, that has been disastrous. That is a bad idea. And that's why God's law never allows the magistrate to define who's a Christian. And that's why God's law doesn't punish heresy. Heresy is not defined in the scripture with this chapter and verse like blasphemy is defined in the law.
Heresy is a very
Blasphemy.
broad stroke of lots of people don't like this.
Yes.
That's the
Yes.
definition.
Right. But heresy is not punished in scripture the way that the church has historically punished heresy. Blasphemy and taking the Lord's name in vain. These things are much more definable. These are provable in court. However, heresy is something maybe that the institutional church or the local church doesn't like. Everyone's got their own definition of heresy. So when we give the state the power to define heresy, to define who's a Christian and who's not, innocent people are going to start dying just right away. For a long time, the Baptists. Okay, I get the stories about what was the city in Germany where everything went south, Munster. I get the stories about Munster. I get it. The Anabaptists. I understand it. But they were still arguing against Baptists when Baptists were not saying anything crazy, not saying anything heretical. They were still arguing to let's punish the Baptists. Never, ever give the state the authority to define who's a Christian and who's not. And so when we give the civil magistrate the authority, the responsibility, and tell the sojourner, go report yourself to the magistrate, he's going to start putting burdens on people that he's not going to follow himself. And I don't understand why we have to vet people coming in here when we don't vet our own people. How is somebody coming in here any worse than somebody who's born here? Do we vet babies? I mean, do we vet 17-year-olds on their 18th birthday and
There was
say, hey, are
some
you a good person?
there was some
I don't get it.
movie, I don't remember the name of it, you might, but there was a certain it's similar to The Purge, but there was basically a test given to kids on their 10th birthday or something like that, and if they didn't pass the test, they weren't smart enough, they were exterminated.
Oh man,
It's that
that's
kind of an idea. It's like we don't vet children,
Yeah.
and that's a very dystopian thing. But then we're perfectly okay with that
yes,
in other
yeah.
situations.
I, I mean, that sounds like a lot of young adult novels where you get sorted into some sort of house or something. But um, uh, but that's my question. Why are we vetting people from different nations and we don't vet our own people? Do we just assume that they're good people just because they live here? It was the 2020 riots of the mostly peaceful protests. Those weren't foreigners. You can say, sure, foreigners were involved, but by and large, those were city residents, people who had lived here. People, these are red, yellow, black, and white. Antifa, mostly white people, mostly white liberals who like baseball and hot dogs and cheeseburgers. They were out there destroying people's property in such a way that has dwarfed, in my opinion, any sort of immigrant protests. LA riots maybe a second, but they cannot touch what happened in 2020, 2021 with the mostly peaceful protests and the cities that they destroyed. And those were our own people. Why aren't we vetting them? Why aren't we vetting people like Antifa? Why are we vetting people who come in here who know what a man and a woman is? When our own people, we don't know what a man and a woman is. And we want to keep those people out. Look, I get it. There's really bad immigrants. I get it. I understand. They're horrible people. They come from horrible cultures. And I understand against the problem with the Muslims. But God's law, the way that it's instituted, punishes public acts that are going to try to subvert the nation, which will be blasphemy and sexual immorality. These two things will subvert any nation. Righteousness exalts a nation, not patriotism. And so if anyone comes into this nation under God's law, they are punished if they try any sort of public act of blasphemy against God and his law. So that is what controls immigration in God's system. It's God's law, not the magistrate asking people, who are you and what are you here for? Sorry, long rant on that.
Well, going back to one thing you said earlier, the whole idea of like if you want to sell your property to somebody from Zimbabwe, there
Mhm.
that's one of the more difficult things because there was the safeguard for that in Israel was Jubilee. It's if you're an Israelite landowner, you can't permanently sell unless it's inside a walled city. So if you really want to take the nation over, a city has to literally just expand its walls, which is a very expensive thing to do, something you wouldn't just do willy-nilly. And in some
Right.
cases might never happen. Versus if
If
you want to just sell parts of the countryside, you were allowed to sell that to a foreigner for a max of 49 years if you sold it in the right year.
but one other thing I want to point out is God's law allows, I mean, this is one thing we've given up too with our status system. We're not allowed to discriminate. If I fear that too many people from Zimbabwe are buying up land, or as there is right now, that too many people from China are buying up land, I'm afraid, and I'm a person who's selling a house or selling property, selling, 1 million acres, and I'm concerned that China's buying up too much. I can say to the Chinese buyer, no, I'm not selling to you. I'm not
Sure.
because I don't trust you, and I don't want to sell to you. But right now, under man's law, I can't do that. I have to. I'm not allowed to discriminate. And so again, this comes if we get like a fear that Muslims are moving in, and you are afraid that this Muslim is going to use my property for bad things, then you don't have to sell to them. You can sell to somebody that you trust, somebody that somebody who think is a believer. And but since we've given up the ability to discriminate, you're inviting the takeover of foreign nations. You're just inviting it because now you have to sell to them under law.
Or if you do discriminate, you have to do it under, cloak and dagger, where nobody
Yes.
can tell that that was your real reason for doing it. You just have to say, "Oh, I changed my mind." It has nothing to
Right.
do with your Chinese or whatever.
Yeah.
And then you pay them below the minimum wage. You don't take somebody in your country, give them a green card, and say, but your kids can't go to high school or can't go to college or
I think it's I don't think it's again I don't think it's wise to take our understanding of economics and go back and understand biblical law and biblical jurisprudence with things like the minimum wage. In biblical law, there is no minimum wage, so that kind of thinking doesn't and should not enter into your mind when you're judging how the magistrate should act. We shouldn't be. I don't think it's wise to impose modern status systems, forcing people to do X, Y, and Z. And at the beginning, he said, God's law is very simple. And right now it's very tedious what we have. And my argument is, okay, let's keep everything that's tedious, let's keep it out, including the green card system, including minimum wage laws, including high school, status
Government
schooling.
education, yeah.
Yeah, we can't be factoring these in when we're trying to be faithful to God's word. We can't be factoring these in and judging God's word through the lens of these status systems. That's my problem with that clip.
Yeah, it's a similar thing for me. It's like we can't say, oh, we're against food stamps because the Bible has gleaning laws, but then I like government education and I want to take advantage of that. Don't take that away from me. It's
Right.
no, either you like social welfare programs that go above and beyond what Scripture does, and I would argue that gleaning is a system of welfare. It's a very low, like scratching your life out of the dirt, subsistence level of welfare.
Yes.
But it is technically something, and I know some libertarians don't like that because they want to be, they're more idealistic to their ideals. They're more beholden to their ideals of individual rights from a secular perspective than they are from a biblical perspective.
Yes.
But you can't say, I like these social systems and I don't like these social systems. Well, the question is, what does Scripture say
Yes.
about what should exist and what shouldn't exist?
Amen. Amen.
Natural protections. And so the Torah is trying to protect them from the abuse that almost invariably will come. So I think Scripture is wonderful in how it seeks to protect them, but it's not extended to anybody who just walks in and says, well, here I am. There was a process, and we can see that at work in a number of biblical stories.
Again, this is a contention that I have. I don't think it's, and as you said earlier, you said the exact same thing. We don't appeal to stories to develop or to institute God's law. We appeal to God's law. We're chapter and verse people of the book. We don't say there's a story, and just because he did it, that means I can do it. That's a bad hermeneutic. God has not given his law so that we could just ignore it and go to what certain people did at certain times and make it appeal to them. I do not believe there was a process as far as living in Israel. I don't think you had to go through any sort of process to live in Israel at all. I understand there's a process for becoming part of the assembly, which is not a one-for-one. I do not believe is a one-for-one ratio of understanding citizenship. I mean, there's so many problems. If you appeal to the assembly, there's a lot of problems that you have to deal with because of the requirements. I mean, as far as, no one with crushed testicles is allowed to become part of the assembly. So now we're not allowed to let anyone with crushed testicles become a citizen. And now we have to be checking people's testicles at the border. Now we know we're not going to do that, and we know people weren't doing that back in Israel. So we can't make an appeal. I do not think we can be consistent in our biblical hermeneutic and make an appeal to assembly like, oh, this is citizenship. No, I don't think it was at all. I don't think they understood citizenship the way that we understand citizenship. I think that's a statist understanding that we give privileges and rights and responsibilities to people who are citizens. That doesn't make sense to me. I don't know why we would do that.
Yeah, in Israel, it was we're giving you legal status to enter into a family's bloodline. That was the deal for them, because it's now you are a child of Abraham. Legally speaking, basically in every sense that we can make it true, other than you just don't have Abraham as a parent, but we're going to give you an inheritance in the land along with us. We're going to give you preferential loans. We're going to, all the things, just like you were a family member. That's not the same idea we have for citizenship.
Right. And if that's your understanding of the assembly, That's very interesting because I'm not 100% sure what the assembly was for and what it means. And a lot of people are confused. If you see Phil Kaiser's work on it, he gives like 9 theories on what the assembly was and what the purpose was. And yours, I'm not sure if it was on there actually. Might have been. But that's very interesting. But all that to say, the assembly is not a good appeal for citizenship, and as you concluded there at the end, it's not the way that we understand citizenship. The assembly back then is not a 1-for-1 ratio of our modern day understanding of citizenship and their understanding of who was allowed to be in the assembly. And so my problem with that clip was um, that he said there was a process, and we see it in the stories. First of all, I don't think we see it in the stories the way that we understand it. I mean, the if then.
I'd be curious to know what stories he would put forward. I'd like to think through those.
The ones that he put forward was Moses and Jethro and Jacob and Pharaoh. So I do not believe that there was. I mean, you
Joseph and Pharaoh.
Well, you say Jacob and Pharaoh too, because Jacob was the one who said, "Can we sojourn among you?" Right?
Gotcha. Right.
Right. So I mean, there are examples of people requesting to pass through, to sojourn, and that's fine. I get it. I understand, but that does not mean that's first of all, that's not in God's law. There's nowhere you find that in God's law that people who come in have to ask first. That's not anywhere in God's law that they must request a meeting and sit down with the magistrate, explain themselves why they're here, blah, blah, blah. That's not in God's law. You get punished for breaking God's law publicly. And if you just decide to fly in here on a jet and buy land, you do not need to talk to or report yourself or justify yourself to the magistrate at all. And I think a lot of this argumentation comes from us trying to, in my very humble opinion, trying to force our statist understanding of law, jurisprudence, immigration onto the text. And we use stories to justify. We use description. Well, here's what happened. Okay, but is that what God told us to do? Well, no. Okay, then let's do what God told us to do. Let's start there, institute God's law as is, keep out the legislature, and to make sure no one can change it so that, my grandchildren wake up or die in the same system that I'm born in and nothing changes. And we develop strong traditions and customs because of this. Since the law's not going to change, your traditions and your customs become stronger. And so I think we should stay away from saying, well, here's the description. That means we need to institute X. I don't think that's right. I think we go to God's law, and we got a chapter and verse where God told the magistrate, here's what I want you to do. And then we start there. And then we don't add or take away from it. And if we do that, we cannot institute many people's understanding of a modern immigration vetting system.
You've got something very close in the book of Numbers when the Hebrews were basically on their way to the promised land. They weren't there yet.
Yeah.
And they would run up against all these kings, and they'd be like, whoa, stop. You can't cross into our land. And so this is private property. Now, there might have been like a local dignitary or ruler that was, scared, like, they might have just been through a battle or something, and they'd rather play it safe than sorry. And so Israel would say, we'll pay you. We'll pay you for any water that our animals drink. We'll pay you for any grass that they eat. And they're like, nope, sorry, we won't accept that. You just can't, we won't allow you to pay us. And so Israel's like, okay, we'll divert. We're not going to come through here. And then somebody else does that, where they come up to try to cross through somebody else's territory, and they're like, we'll pay you. And this other ruler is like, nope, you can't. And so Israel's like, all right, we're leaving. And presumably they had crossed into it slightly for there to be a little bit of a conflict. So as Israel is on its way out, they chase them out and then attack them beyond their borders. And I think the text specifically says God fought for Israel. And basically, because that king did like an extrajudicial attacking somebody beyond his own borders, they hadn't even crossed through yet, God gave him over to defeat to the Israelites, and the Israelites are like, oh, okay, cool. Well, we own your stuff now.
Yeah.
So it's like you've got this distinction between, a private landowner making a stink and maybe the ruler hears about it and gets involved because there's an entire nation of people that are at your doorstep. Okay, that might be enough for the community to gather together and make a group decision, yes or no, as a whole. That makes sense to me. But what if it was one Hebrew grazing his sheep out there and the entire nation comes against him and says, you're not allowed. That would have been unnecessary. That property owner could have said, hey, I grew that grain. Please don't graze your sheep there. You owe me this much money.
Right. And the question often comes is, what if there's a big group of people who want to peacefully, but that they have guns and they're all military-aged men and they're all Muslims and they want to come and live in your land. But that they're going to, as soon as they cross the border, they're going to start pillaging and raping and all that kind of stuff. Any argument for, well, I should say most arguments for instituting some sort of law so that, we have to not disallow that scenario. What I'm trying to say is that it's an argument against the right to peaceably assemble. Because what if these people come into the nation legally and then they assemble and they're saying we're doing this for peaceful reasons, but they look like they're not going to be peaceful. So what do? Do we then get rid of the right to peaceably assemble? Well, no, we don't ever do that. What does a magistrate do? The magistrate shows up and says, if you guys get out of hand, we're going to put you back in hand. And so I think that the scenario is similar with if there's a big group of people outside and they want to walk through and they want to come in and live, and they say they do, but you suspect that they're not, the magistrate's allowed to show up and say, okay, all right, you come in, but if you guys act up, we're going to kill all of you.
And as long as everybody along the way agrees to it, because it's all these individual citizens' land.
Right. And they'll probably be taking roads that you have to pay for. So you got to pay for everything, right? Because the government doesn't own roads. And if we get reports that you guys are acting up, we will declare war on you, and we will defend our nation to the point of death.
Yeah, the whole immigration thing, it can get sticky because it's a question of, okay, well, when is it enough people are doing this to where you can pinpoint where they're from and you need to go, take a battle to them if necessary. Right. How many people you've got is that in Judges where the men of Gibeah rape the Levite's concubine? Yeah, that's Judges. And so they chase the men down to the tribe of Benjamin, because Gibeah is in Benjamin. So they go to the tribe of Benjamin and say, hey, give us this city. And the tribe of Benjamin, they could have said, oh, that's terrible what they did. Go get them, boys. But then the entire tribe of Benjamin says, no, we're going to gather around this city and we're going to protect them. Now it's a civil war between all the other tribes in Benjamin. Yep. But there's another example in Kings where a guy does something bad, a group of men chase him back to his city, and then they're about to make war against the city, and a wise woman comes out to the gate and was like, what's everybody doing here? Tell us what you want. And they're like, we want this guy and this guy. Mm-hmm. And she's like, okay, give me 1 second. And she turns around and she tosses their heads over the wall. Mm-hmm. And they're like, are you guys okay? Are you satisfied? And they're like, yep, we're good. We're going home. And so, war averted.
Yes. But God's law allows these things to happen without getting it.
Yeah, it's war is basically a trial on a national scale. You're seeking restitution. If they don't agree to peaceably come, then you kill them. Otherwise, they're slaves and they work to pay for what they did. It's basically just a mass case of restitution that needs to happen.
Great way to put it. Trial on a national scale. I'll probably use that in the future.
Cool. I like to be quoted. Luke, thanks for coming on. We'll post this soon. And I'm interested to continue the discussion. Glad we finally were able to bring a different perspective in here and get to actually respond to a real person.
Thank you so much for thinking of me. Thanks for inviting me, man. Thanks for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.